Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney. Today's review, we're going to be looking at artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of influence of artificial intelligence on data protection because in some capacity, the manner in which artificial intelligence is being rolled out in most organizations impacts how personal data is processed. It's really important when you are drafting or thinking about rolling out a policy or notice to your consumers, whoever those data subjects are. It's really important to have privacy in mind, which is why we're going to look over some of the privacy provisions that impact this particular policy. So, okay, we're not doing cookies today. We're doing AI. So the first thing that struck me when I looked at this was I really appreciated the fact that we've identified who the data subjects are in this policy. That's really important, right? Organizations have thousands and thousands of documents that they produce, right? Some are intended for an employee audience. Some are intended for our customer audience. Some are intended for our vendors and partners, right? Identifying who the data subject that a document applies to is something that should happen at the beginning of any notice or policy. And I talk about this in other reviews, whether it's we're looking at the privacy notice, cookie notice, policies, any of these privacy documentations always outline who is in scope for this particular policy. So me interacting with the site, I wouldn't consider myself a customer. So the audience here would not be me, right? Because I'm just a website visitor. But the value in knowing this is because there's different types of personal data that you collect from your customers than that which you collect from your employees. So outlining who's in scope from a data subject perspective is very, very important because it influences the provisions you have in any privacy documentation you have, whether it's traditional privacy documentation like a notice or if it's not traditional like an artificial intelligence policy, right? I think outlining customers is important, and actually I want to have a bit of a discussion about why this is important. Generally, when we're doing like outreach to our customers, we're looking at presenting them on why we should be the supplier for them, right? There's a lot of competition. Let me have a look at these products. So this particular organization does digital asset management. I'm very sure that this is not the only organization in the whole world that provides digital asset management, right? So during something called the request for proposal phase, if you are in the business space, you know what that phase is. It's basically where a customer is out in the marketplace and they're looking for a supplier to provide them a particular service. So during that period of time, one thing that I talk a lot about is the documents that are submitted to the prospective customer in order for them to understand what your offering is. And that's very important, right? You want to make sure that that is accurately reflecting what you do internally. Now, as part of that request for proposal phase, we have the privacy documentation. And so we have maybe the notice. Sometimes we have an internal policy, depends on if the supplier wants to share that. So they share those informations with their prospective customers. And it seems like the audience here would be, this one says to provide customers with additional information. So I'm not entirely sure if these are already people that have the service or if this is distributed to prospective customers, because that's different, right? Prospective, they don't yet have any of your products. Customer, they've already got your products. But I'm just going to make the presumption that because they've used the word customer explicitly here, that this is for people that already have their products that feature the AI capabilities, right? So the reason I've just gone on that long explanation is because, again, it feeds back into the type of personal data you collect on your customers is going to be different to other data subjects you have within your organization. So each document you distribute needs to be tailored for that audience. If this was for an employee audience, we might see different provisions within the definition and below. But because this is for a customer audience, we need to think about what types of personal data are associated with our customers, usually their name, their business email address, their business phone number. We're not going to be collecting social security numbers from our customers, but if this was an employee audience, we might be talking about different data identifiers. And based on each respective data protection law, we have different considerations we have to make for each identifier. If the identifier is a special category, we have certain considerations. If that information is sensitive based on the definition in that geography, right? We know that in the United States, we have over 20 US state privacy laws that have specific definition on what constitutes sensitive data. So even if in California we have certain sensitive identifiers that are not recognized in the Texas data protection law, we still have to take into consideration that that could be in scope for our organization and it needs to be covered, right? So I'm not going to spend too much more time on that, but I don't think I really go into what really goes into drafting these policies and the privacy considerations that businesses should have when they are drafting them. So let's keep going. I love that they have definitions. Now let's talk a bit about the EU AI Act. Now, the relationship here is they've said applicable law. Let's talk about two things. First of all, talk about the EU AI Act. The first thing I want to say about this is AI legislation that has very specific requirements to be met and different responsibilities that businesses have under this particular act. Now, the reason why this is listed here, and we'll also see that we've got the GDPR. So this tells me a couple of things. One, it may be that this potential organization has customers that are located in these geographies. Otherwise, why would they list applicable laws as European Union legislation? We've got the EU AI Act here, and then we've also got the GDPR. Now, the one that really impinges exclusively on privacy is this one, General Data Protection Regulation. And this essentially details how businesses can process personal data in the European Union and in the EEA. And so we're not going to focus on that because this is an AI review, but the purpose of me talking about this is I talked about how even traditional documents that aren't privacy documentation, right? This is an AI policy, influences privacy. Why? Because generally these AI, in different capacities, artificial intelligence touches on personal data. Now, if a business understands what constitutes personal data, then they'll understand why an AI policy would need to be reviewed by a privacy lawyer, right? Because let's say, for example, you're procuring the AI, right? This is a supplier providing something to their customer. Something you might be interested in as a customer is how have they trained their algorithm? What type of data have they used to train their algorithm? Why? Because it influences the types of provisions you might have in your privacy notice. Let's say, for example, you as the customer already have in your privacy notice, hey, we always have a legal basis for processing personal information. If you procure a supplier that doesn't have privacy practices that are similar to yours, it could influence the transparency that you place on your own website for your own customers, for your own consumers, for your own data subjects. And I keep using the word data subject because that's the official terminology in the privacy legislation. Essentially, it means an individual. And so you can see that the applicable laws they've listed here are the EU AI Act and then the GDPR. There are influences on this EU AI Act and the GDPR that need to be taken into consideration if you have AI features available to your customers, definitely. Let's talk about biometric data, right? So I don't know how this product functions, but we talk about biometric data. I'll talk about it from a privacy perspective. The value here is that in most geographies, there is different business considerations that need to be taken into effect if a business is going to process biometric data. I keep using the word process because process is a very broad terminology in the data protection space, and it basically means any operation or set of operations on personal data. Now, biometric data is considered sensitive in some geographies and a special category in other geographies, right? So you need to understand what the law says about what a specific identifier is and how you can use it. And in some other geographies, you can see here in the United States, we also have state-specific legislation that influences the processing of biometric data. So let's say, for example, you have customers in all these geographies, you need to take that into consideration. You can't just look at where you're headquartered, right? So I think the reason they've added a definition here is because there is a component of their AI feature that processes biometric data. Now, I don't know that for a fact because we haven't looked through the entire thing, but the value of mentioning it in this review is to let you know that this is considered sensitive in many geographies. And when we have sensitive data, we have to put additional safeguards in place under the data protection laws. Okay, the last thing we're going to talk about is customer data. I can already identify a couple of things that I can say for a fact may constitute personal data. Let's talk about pictures, right? If you clicked on this video and you looked at the thumbnail, you saw a picture of me, Funmi Owolabi. From looking at that thumbnail, you've been able to identify me, right? You've seen my face, so you can identify it and put it together with my voice over this video, right? Those two pieces of information together identify me as the principal attorney, right? You're able to identify who's talking because of the picture that I presented on my thumbnail and the fact that I'm talking. And I also identified myself through the audio that is who is speaking. So just from knowing that, we know that there is influences of privacy on how this AI features, because they've provided a definition of what constitutes customer data. And what they're saying here is they've got inputs, meaning the prompts or any other data that the customer submits. So if you're submitting, let's just say, for example, you submit my picture and this video as an input, right? Those identifiers are being ingested into this artificial intelligence, meaning that this organization then processes that information. There are responsibilities on them as a supplier and you as a customer. One, because you already have that data, and two, them ingesting it through their AI features. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have comments or questions, leave them below and I'll see you in another review.